It was a quiet summer morning in the peaceful farming town of Vineyard, Utah. The sun had just risen, casting a golden glow over the vast fields of corn that stretched out in every direction. For years, the kids of the town had played in these very fields, their laughter echoing through the rows of tall, green stalks. But something felt different today. Corbin and his friends, Chad, Dennis, Holly, and Tanya, were all gathered at their usual meeting spot behind Corbin's house. They had been planning their summer adventures, eager to spend another day exploring. As always, their first stop was a nearby cornfield. "Let's see if we can find Kay before he spots us," said Chad with a grin, referring to the grumpy farmer who owned the field. The children eagerly jumped over the ditch and ventured into the corn, weaving their way through the tall plants, trying to remain hidden from Kay as he made his rounds. But today, something was off. As they walked deeper into the field, the air grew colder, the stillness of the place overwhelming. It felt as though something was watching them, a presence just beyond the reach of their senses. The sense of adventure quickly turned to unease. Tanya, walking at the front of the group, suddenly stopped. Her eyes scanned the field with an expression that made Corbin's blood run cold. "There's something here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The rest of the group froze, tension rising. "What do you mean, something here?" Dennis asked, trying to keep the mood light, but his voice faltered. Tanya pointed toward a small clearing in the field. As the others followed her gaze, they saw something that made them stop dead in their tracks. There, in the center of the clearing, were 5 shiny black boxes, each tied with a red silk ribbon. They stood in a perfect row, as though waiting for them. Corbin felt his heart race. There was no way they had missed these before. The boxes seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. What are these?" Holly asked, her voice trembling. Without a word, Corbin walked toward the nearest box. His hands shook as he reached for the ribbon and pulled it, causing the lid to slide open. Inside, to his shock, was an action figure, one he had wanted for years but could never afford. It was too surreal. The others, in the same trance-like state, opened their boxes and found their own gifts, each one something they had always desired but never received. Before they could even comprehend what was happening, the world seemed to shift. The boxes vanished, leaving them in stunned silence. "Did that just happen?" Tanya gasped, holding up the cassette tape she had found in her box. But before anyone could answer, the sound of a distant voice rang out from the edge of the field. "Hey, you damn kids of my corn!" It was Kay. The children quickly ran, hearts pounding, desperate to escape before he could catch them. They didn't stop running until they reached the barn, where they hid among the hay, breathless and wide-eyed. They looked at the items in their hands, still unable to process what had just occurred. Then, something strange began to happen. A cold emptiness settled over Corbin. Something deep inside him started to change, and as they sat there, the items in their hands began to feel heavier, darker, as though they came with a price. As Corbin and his friends sat huddled in the barn, a strange feeling washed over them. The items they had found seemed innocent enough, but something about them felt off, like they weren't meant to be found. Suddenly, a sharp creak echoed from the dark corners of the barn. The group froze. The door had swung open, but there was no wind. From the shadows, a figure emerged, its face obscured by the darkness. Corbin's heart skipped a beat as the cold, familiar scent of the cornfield filled the air. It was Kay, but something was different about him. He seemed more intense, as if something darker had taken hold of him. "We should never have touched those things," Corbin thought, his pulse racing. The barn felt like a trap now, one they couldn't escape from. As the mysterious figure stepped closer, Corbin's mind raced. The pieces of the strange events were finally starting to connect, but the truth was too terrifying to comprehend. Kay's eyes gleamed with an eerie glow, and his voice, when he spoke, had a distorted, almost otherworldly quality. "You've unleashed something you don't understand," he said, his words sending a chill down their spines. The barn that had once felt like a place of safety now felt like a cage, and the objects they had found weren't just relics. They were keys to something far darker. The more Corbin thought about it, the clearer it became. The twisted symbols on those items, the unease they had all felt, and now this moment with Kay. It was all part of something much bigger, something ancient. Fear gripped Corbin as Kay reached into his jacket, pulling out an old, weathered book. "This is the beginning of the end," Kay whispered. Corbin felt the weight of Kay's words pressing down on him. The room seemed to spin, the atmosphere thick with an almost tangible tension. Kay was standing so close now that Corbin could feel the cold emanating from him. The book in Kay's hand seemed to pulse with an ancient energy, its pages whispering secrets that Corbin wasn't sure he was ready to hear. The question hung in the air like a cloud, heavy and suffocating. Do you want to learn the truth? A simple question, but the answer felt like it could change everything. It wasn't just about solving the mystery anymore. It was about stepping into a world he could never return from. Corbin glanced around the room, his mind in turmoil. He remembered the unease that had followed them since they discovered the chest, the feeling that something was watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. This wasn't just about an ancient artifact or long-forgotten secrets. It was about stepping into something much bigger, something dangerous. Kay's smile, twisted and knowing, never left his face. He could sense Corbin's hesitation, but there was no time for indecision. The world outside seemed to fade, leaving just the two of them, locked in this moment. "I can see it in your eyes," Kay murmured, almost as if reading his mind. "You're scared, but fear is the price of knowledge. If you truly want to know what lies beyond this world, beyond the veil of what you think is real, then take the book. Accept your fate." Corbin's hand trembled as he reached out toward the book. Every instinct told him to turn away, to run, to escape this madness before it consumed him. But something deeper inside urged him to take the next step, to understand, even if it meant losing himself in the process. Kay's hand shifted, holding the book closer, as if pushing it into Corbin's grasp. Once you accept the truth, there's no turning back. The power that comes with it will change you forever. The words echoed in Corbin's ears. He was at the precipice, staring down into an abyss that promised both enlightenment and destruction. Could he walk away from the knowledge that awaited him? Or would he give in to the temptation of the unknown, the allure of forbidden power? The final choice was his. He reached out, his fingers brushing the edge of the book. For a split second, the world seemed to stop. Time held its breath, the silence absolute, as if even the universe itself was waiting for him to make his decision. Then, with a trembling breath, Corbin took the book from Kay's hands. As soon as his fingers made contact, a jolt of energy shot through him, as if a current had surged directly into his very soul. The room around him blurred, and for an instant he felt a dark presence swirling in the air, something ancient and malevolent watching him, measuring him. Kay's grin widened, a look of satisfaction crossing his face. "It's done. Now, you will see what you were never meant to." Corbin felt the weight of the book in his hands. Its pages fluttered, as if they had a life of their own. Slowly, he opened the first page. Words began to form, and images, visions of another time, another place, flooded his mind. Ancient symbols, rituals, forgotten gods, and secrets lost to time, all of it coming alive before his eyes. But as the visions continued, Corbin felt the darkness tightening around him. The price of knowledge was steep, and it was becoming clear that there was no escaping the consequences of his decision. The room felt heavier now, as if the very air had thickened with the weight of what Corbin had just unleashed. As the visions continued to flood his mind, he felt his sense of self slipping away, replaced by something older, darker. The ancient words etched in the book weren't just stories. They were realities, and Corbin was now a part of them. He could feel the cold breath of the dark force surrounding him, curling around his thoughts, urging him deeper into its embrace. The power was intoxicating, seductive in its promise of unimaginable strength and knowledge. He could feel the pull of something vast, something primordial, whispering his name, coaxing him to surrender fully. The choice he had made, so simple yet so profound, was no longer about curiosity. It was about survival. In that moment, Corbin understood he had crossed a line and there was no turning back. The book had awakened something in him, and with it, a connection to a forgotten power. His heart raced, and his hands shook as he held the book tighter, afraid of losing the grip he had on reality. Kay's voice pierced through the silence, low and knowing. You feel it, don't you? The darkness within you, awakening. It was always there, waiting. You were never meant to be ordinary, Corbin. You were meant for this. Corbin's pulse quickened. The power was so close, and yet he could sense the danger it carried. Every page he turned revealed more secrets, more knowledge of the darkness that now pulsed within him. He was no longer just a man. He was becoming something else entirely, something that couldn't exist in the world he once knew. And yet, despite the fear, despite the overwhelming sense of doom that clawed at him, a part of him was exhilarated. He wasn't just an observer anymore. He was a player in a game far older than him, and for the first time, Corbin felt alive. But at what cost? The darkness had claimed him, and there was no way to turn back now. The next morning, Corbin barely recognized himself. The night had passed in a blur, his thoughts twisted and jagged like the visions that had danced in his mind. Every inch of him felt different, stronger, but also heavier. The darkness had left its mark, a constant hum at the edges of his consciousness. He stood in front of the mirror, eyes studying the man he had become. His reflection was the same, yet not. There was something cold, something calculating in his gaze. The power had changed him, twisted his very essence. Corbin didn't just see a man looking back at him. He saw something more, something ancient and hungry. The book lay on the desk behind him, its pages now filled with a dark energy that seemed to pulse with life. He couldn't look away from it, couldn't resist its call. The price of power was becoming clear. He was no longer in control. The darkness had taken root inside him, and now it whispered incessantly, urging him to seek more. Do you understand now? Kay's voice echoed in his mind again, the words slithering into his thoughts like a snake. The power you seek always demands a price. You tasted it. You felt it. And now, there's no going back. Corbin clenched his fists, feeling the raw energy surge through his veins. He wanted more. He needed more. But as he stood there, staring at his reflection, he knew the cost would be higher than anything he could have imagined. The price of power was not just sacrifice. It was the loss of everything he had once been. As days passed, Corbin's world began to unravel. The darkness inside him grew stronger, clawing at his thoughts, his desires, his very soul. He had started out seeking power, a way to break free from the chains of his ordinary life. But now he was entangled in something far darker than he had ever anticipated. The whispers were constant, like an endless storm in his mind. They were no longer vague or cryptic, but clear and demanding. The voice of Kay had become louder, guiding him, pushing him to take risks, to embrace the unknown. But with each step forward, the consequences of his choices became undeniable. People around him began to change. His friends, once so close, now looked at him with suspicion, their smiles cold, their words laced with fear. Even those who had been loyal to him seemed to sense the shift in his demeanor, the cruelty that had replaced the man they once knew. Corbin tried to ignore the signs, to convince himself that this was all part of the journey. But deep down he knew the truth. The more he gave into the darkness, the more he lost himself. The power he had sought was no longer a tool. It was a force that had taken root inside him, consuming his every thought and desire. The truth was simple, yet horrifying. The more power he gained, the more he became something other than human. The line between man and monster was blurring, and with every decision, the monster was winning. It was no longer about strength or control. It was about survival. In the final moments of his descent into the abyss, Corbin stood at a crossroads. The path behind him, once familiar and filled with possibility, was now a fading memory, overshadowed by the darkness that had claimed him. His reflection in the mirror no longer showed the face of the man he used to be. Instead, it was something else, something unrecognizable, cold, and hollow. Kay's voice was clearer than ever before. It urged him to take the final step, to sever all remaining ties with his humanity and embrace the power fully. Corbin could feel it, the magnetic pull of absolute control, of becoming untouchable. It promised him everything he had ever wanted: dominance, respect, an unchallenged reign over all. But with the promise of power came the heavy cost of isolation. His friends, his family, those he once cared for, had all either betrayed him or distanced themselves. They saw the change in him, and though some tried to reach out, to pull him back, they had failed. The monster was already too far gone. The choice was clear. He could continue down this dark path, letting Kay lead him into a world of domination and fear. Or, for the first time in a long while, he could turn back, embrace the remnants of his humanity, and face the consequences of his actions. As Corbin stood there, torn between two worlds, the weight of his decisions crushed him. The power he sought had not brought him freedom. It had brought him nothing but emptiness. His mind, once sharp and filled with purpose, now felt clouded with regret. The moment of truth arrived. Would Corbin continue his descent into darkness, or would he choose to confront the consequences of his choices, no matter how painful? Only time would reveal the final outcome of his journey, but in his heart, Corbin knew one thing. There was no turning back from the path he had chosen. As the battle comes to an end, the dust settles, leaving behind a quiet, yet powerful silence. The protagonist stands at a crossroads, one path leading to the darkness of power, and the other to the light of redemption. Every step taken has been a struggle, each decision weighing heavy on the heart. In the end, it's not about winning the battle or gaining control, but about what the soul seeks most: peace, redemption, or an irreversible grasp on power. The final choice rests in their hands. Will they continue down the road of vengeance, or will they embrace the possibility of redemption? The story concludes, leaving the readers to reflect on the true cost of power and the possibility of change. The end, for now,